This is what draws the question for like an attending physician side of things, right? If inflation's been 8%, 9% for the last year, and we're putting money into a regular savings account, that money is losing 8 or 9% of its value in the next 12 months. And so there are people out there that would say, well, hey, are there other ways to, have an emergency fund available, like alternatives? And the further out I get, and honestly, the infrequency with which I've tapped into my emergency fund, I've started to kind of gravitate this direction too. And so maybe I'll talk about what I do, and then we can talk about other alternatives that exist. But for me, like I'm starting to realize that a brokerage account is something that I can tap into pretty quickly, like within a few days. And so if I just had a reasonable size emergency fund, maybe even just 1 month of expenses in a savings account, I probably don't need more than that actually comes up. Like that happens in reality. Like, and that's not just theoretical. And like, if I lost my job, like would I need to access that money immediately? The obvious answer is no. I don't have to get it within 24 hours. And so it started bringing into this, like, should I use a brokerage account? Right. But then that has pros and cons too, so should you tap into your brokerage account? Timing matters a lot. Right. So is the market up? Is the market down? Because you're going to be actualizing whatever losses or gains you've created. Are they in stocks? Are they in bonds? What sort of positions are being held? But for me, I think that I have gotten to the point where I realize like the amount that I need in a regular savings account isn't as much as I used to think that it was. And that as long as I have other assets that I can tap into, God forbid a real emergency happened. Yeah, I've started to go that direction, which surprises me because the last 5 years I've been pretty steadfast in like having 3 to 6 months in cash sitting in my just regular savings account at my bank.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote an article the other day. It was talking about the pros and cons of emergency funds, and I talked about opportunity cost really. And I think that's what you're alluding to here. And what I really talk about from a resident's perspective is that there is an opportunity cost to saving money for an emergency fund, right? Because when you need it most, it's hardest to get. And when I say it's hardest to get as a resident, when you're only making, $3,000 or $4,000, what you're bringing home, you've got rent that's skyrocketing, you've got gas that's increasing, you've got food that's more expensive. All of a sudden, it's harder to save money for an emergency fund. But you need it most as a resident. You need it most as somebody who is in training, because if an emergency happens, you're going to be the most burdened by that, right? And so when you need it most, it's hardest to get. And then as an attending, you make a lot more money. So you're better able to kind of cash flow these emergencies, quote unquote. As an attending, I'm sure if the tires were to go out in your car, it would be an inconvenience, but wouldn't it be an emergency for you? If you needed a new phone, it'd be an inconvenience, but it wouldn't be an emergency. And so I think when you're talking about as a resident doctor versus an attending doctor, what constitutes an emergency changes, and then how much money you need changes. And then what you were alluding to is like, hey, I'm at the point in my attending life, which I personally don't know about, but sounds really cool. You know, where you're at the point in your life where you're making so much money. Again, wouldn't know what that felt like, but sounds pretty cool.
It's coming. It's coming soon.
You're making so much money that you're like, hey, you know what? I'm at the point where I've got tens of thousands of dollars in an emergency fund. Is this really the best place for this money given this inflation environment, given that I'm losing purchasing power? And I think you bring up a really great point, and that is what brings out the discussion of what are some other things I could do with this money?
Start before you're ready. Start by starting. Start now.